Hey dreamers, welcome back to Views from a Dreamer. I am Latisha Carr, your host and your life coach, and I am super excited to be starting off this new series of Where Are They Now? So this is the very first episode of the Where Are They Now series of Views from a Dreamer. I'm excited to bring back some of our favorites from the past episodes to catch up with them and their dreams. So this episode, I'm happy to have one of my good friends, Tatum Harrison, back to the podcast.
Yes.
So since Tatum's last interview, she has done the most. So we're just gonna have a conversation and spend some time catching up on all the amazing things she has been up to. Yeah. So last time we chatted, Tatum was working full time and she was running the Queen Academy.
Yes.
So I'm gonna let Tatum catch you guys up on a little bit of what she's been doing since around this time in 2016. So it's been about 2 years since Tatum's been on. So Tatum, I don't know how we're gonna go about this since then, but catch us up. What is going on since November 2016?
Oh my gosh,
Exactly.
I feel like when I explain what's been happening since then, it's going to seem like it's been 20 years as opposed to 2 years. But yeah, November 2016, you said?
2016, yeah.
Yeah, so November 2016, I was working full-time, preparing to be a full-time entrepreneur. Wasn't exactly sure how that was going to happen. But that was definitely my goal and my intention at the time. I was working full-time as well as running my youth program, the Queen Academy. And I believe at that time we were an after-school program. So around that time, I was doing a lot, working full-time, trying to figure out how to expand this youth program to be my full-time gig, working in the school. So some days I was going from work to leaving work early to go present the program at the school I was doing a lot. But since then, a lot has changed. So I launched a podcast. Since then, it's now called the Blessed and Bossed Up Podcast. I became a full-time entrepreneur on May 3rd, 2017. Walked away and haven't had to look back by the grace of God. And I actually became a lot closer in my relationship with God, and with that, my path has definitely taken a turn. When I did the podcast before, I was just so sure that the Queen Academy was going to be that vehicle that took me to this level of success that I was dreaming of. And the best way to describe it is I like to use a quote from T.D. Jakes' book, Soar. And so in the book, he talks about how the business isn't the dream, it's just the vehicle that takes you there. And sometimes the vehicle or the business isn't it, but it leads you to it. So it leads you to that thing that's going to take you to the dream. And so for me, I thought that the Queen Academy at that time was that vehicle, but from growing in that business and growing in my relationship with God, I realized that I was just scratching the surface. That was just a small part for that was a small part of the big picture that God has for me. And so since then, like I said, I started the podcast I moved on from the Queen Academy and I started doing consulting. So once I realized that the Queen Academy wasn't that vehicle, I was trying to figure out, well, how do I monetize my other skills so that I can create a business out of that? And so my undergrad degree is in PR. Marketing has always been my area of expertise as far as my skill set goes. So I was like, perfect. I'm going to take my ability to build brands and make them successful, and I'm going to use that to help other entrepreneurs like me who may not have those skills. And so things began to really pick up with that. I was self-employed. I was making more money in my business than I was making in my job. So I was super excited. But then remember, I said my relationship with God was growing at that time too. So once I got a little bit more mature in Christ, and I began to just really seek God and surrender all of my ambitions and all of my goals to Him, I began to realize I still wasn't scratching the surface in what God has for me. And the biggest lesson in that was just because you're good at something doesn't mean that that's God's best for you. And so I was building this business, this other business that was catching on. I had great clients. I was making great money. And God is like, yeah, no, don't do that, because you're still thinking too small. So I was at the point where, okay, God, what is it that you want me to do? And so the podcast, when I started, was originally called the Black Girl Boss Podcast. And I started that podcast because I was tired of people who were already successful speaking on from this elitist standpoint of, here's how to be so successful like me. And I wanted to hear people who were in the trenches really talking about the day-to-day and the highs and lows of entrepreneurship. And when God began to speak to me about my podcast, he was like, the same reason that you started the podcast for business is the same way I'm going to use the podcast for my purpose. So the same way I was looking at people who were successful in business is the same way that I needed people who were more mature in their walk with God, or in their relationship with God. People who are more mature a lot of times aren't able to relate to the people who are still building that relationship with God and trying to figure out what faith and spirituality or Christianity is for them. And so God wanted me to keep the same intention but change the subject matter. And so that's what I did. I changed the podcast from the Black Girl Boss Podcast to the Blessed and Bossed Up Podcast, where we really close the space between faith and business and talk about building a business while also building a relationship with God. And how do you learn to hear from God? How do you know what God's plan is for your life? How does that translate into entrepreneurship? And so just really taking the same thing that I was doing and adding God into it led me to where I am now, of this podcast platform just really taking off. I just published my first book that's called Blessed and Bossed Up as well. I published earlier this year a prayer journal for entrepreneurs. I'm going to be publishing a devotional for entrepreneurs before the year is over. And so God has really just used me. I've been booked to speak for various engagements about faith and business. And so yeah, that's where I am. A total 360 from, 360 is like when you back in the start. A total 180. A total 180 from where I was 2 years ago, but still proud of the journey, and I'm so proud of where I am.
So, like I said, Tatum is doing the most.
The absolute most.
And it's a great thing that we're able to do the Where Are They Now, because it's been 2 years since we've had a conversation on the podcast. Mm-hmm. But I've been on your podcast. Me and you talk all the time. And so much has changed within those 2 years. Like, we actually became friends within that 2 years.
Right.
And like, so many different things have changed. And I think what people don't get to see is people's transition. So you moved from doing the Queen Academy to consulting, and now you have this major podcast that's taken off, and people don't always get to see people's journeys this way. So I'm excited that we're able to have this conversation about the journey and how you went from doing one thing that was the vehicle and continuing to move along. Even still, I feel like we talked before we started recording that you're still not where God has for you, right? So, and it's been 2 years, and people think that, these overnight successes happen, and, all these things happen for people so quickly, when in reality, a lot of the times, we're just working every single day, one step at a time, putting one foot in front of the other, and trusting God, and putting our faith in what God has told us to do. So I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that have led you to where you are now today compared to 2 years ago. So you talked about adding God to your business. So how have you added God to your business, like, tangibly? What does that mean?
Yeah, so remember when I first started growing my relationship with God, it wasn't a part of the business automatically. It was just something that, it was like every year I always set this New Year resolution of, this year I'm going to grow closer to God. And then it never really happened, because I went back to just doing the things I always, did the same way I always did them. I would go to church sometimes. Sometimes I wouldn't go. It was just the same old dance. But in 2016 was a year I was living on my own. I was really coming into my own as a woman, getting started in entrepreneurship and learning a lot about myself and what I want to do in life and all of that. I decided that I wanted to stop being inconsistent in my faith. And so what I did practically was I bought a journal. So it was a blank journal. It was just a spiral notebook of blank pages. And I just started writing out my feelings. And I remember it was actually in October of 2016. I think, yeah, 2016. I wrote down 3 things that I was believing in God for. And this is still a practice that I do to this day. Whenever I want something to happen in my life and I'm submitting it to God, I write it in my journal. So it's kind of like a act of, once this gets written in this journal and this journal closes, I'm not worrying about it anymore. And so at the end of that year, I wrote down 3 things. I wanted a husband. I was tired of dating. I was tired of going on these dates for free meals and being bored. I was just not meeting the people that I wanted to meet. And I was just tired of playing the empty dating games. Like, I just didn't want to waste my time. So I wrote husband on as, it wasn't number 1. It was probably like number 3. But it was one of the 3 things. I wanted to be a full-time entrepreneur. So I wrote that down in the journal. And then I also wanted financial freedom, but financial freedom at that point just meant I didn't want to live paycheck to paycheck. I didn't want every 2 weeks I'm waiting to get paid so that I can afford the things that I wanted to do. I just wanted the freedom to enjoy my life without having to worry too much about money. And once I wrote those 3 things down, I just closed the book and left it at that. And then I also thought about too, well, how can I change what I'm looking, or change the things that I'm doing to be able to open myself up for the things that I'm asking God for? So when it came to the financial piece, and that's something I even do now, like, I'm like, God, I want to be a millionaire. Like, the financial freedom you giving me is cool, but I know that you created me to give me life abundantly. So I want an abundance of finances as well. So for me now, I've been watching a lot of like Susie Orman, Can I Afford It videos, and just things like that, so that I know when I get the money, I can keep it. I'm not just out here buying Chanel bags. I'm investing in properties and things that appreciate or whatever. So I applied those same principles back then. It was like, what can I do to prepare for this? So if I'm believing in God for a husband, let me stop playing around with these people that's wasting my time that I know is not it. Or if I'm believing in God to be a full-time entrepreneur, what does it take to be a full-time entrepreneur? Am I maximizing the time that I have now? Because if I don't know how to balance the time I have now, when I get to being a full-time entrepreneur, I'm really ain't gonna know how to balance my time. What? Especially working from home. I'm going to be in the bed watching Netflix and not doing anything in my business. So I had to figure out, like, how can I better manage what I have now to prepare myself for the things I'm asking for? So that's something that I practically did. And then I continued to just journal my feelings. I would find scriptures that spoke to what I was believing in God for, and I would just write those things down. Another thing for me was I didn't know how to hear from God. So it was like, I want to get closer to God, but I don't even know his voice. So how can I figure out how to do that? And what I did was I bought Joyce Meyer's book, How to Hear from God. And it's a book I recommend to everybody who struggles with that. I don't even begin to try to explain to you how he speaks to us, because that book does it perfectly. So I read that book and I learned the different ways that God speaks to people. And then I was like, well, God, how do you speak to me? And I was just really asking to learn his voice and things like that. And over time, I began to learn that. You know, I know for you, God speaks to you a lot through dreams, but God doesn't really speak to me through dreams. If I'm watching Blackish before I fall asleep, my dream is going to be about whatever was going on in Blackish. Like, it's never... God, he does sometimes, but that's not usually how God speaks to me. So just pretty much figuring out how God speaks to me was another priority for me. And so practically those are the things I did. I journaled. I sought books and practical resources on the things I wanted to grow in. And I made room in my life for the things that I was asking for.
Different ways, and finding those ways to hear from God is so important. Don't listen to me. Everybody doesn't hear from God the same way I do. Sometimes, but for me, sometimes God drops to my spirit, right? Just out of nowhere. I'll just be minding my business. The other day, I reached out to my friend and told her she's supposed to be having a women's conference. And I don't know why that dropped into my spirit. I literally was just minding my business, like working on something, and it came in my spirit for something for someone else to do.
Yeah.
And those are things that I think we have to listen to as well, and not being selfish with those things and using our discernment. But I love your tangible ways that you implementing putting God into your business and into your life, one of the things that I do is I have every week in my planner, I have this area I write out pray, listen, work, repeat, right? And so it's like columns. So the things that I'm praying for the week, and then I'm intentional about listening for the answers for those things that I'm praying for. And as soon as I recognize or see or dream about or whatever the case may be, what the answer might be, I write it down immediately.
Yeah.
And then I ask God to show me what the work is to do for that. And then I just repeat that cycle over and over again. So I use that as my tangible way to keep track of what I'm asking God for and what I'm trusting God for and what he's answering me. Because I think a lot of times we act like God's not answering us.
Yeah.
And he is, we're just not listening.
And I want to add to that. I want to add to that too, Tish. Like back, speaking of still 2 years ago, I would, I don't know if it was a Joyce Meyer's book or something. I had ended up writing down like pray and obey. Like that's the process. You pray and after you hear from God, you obey what he said. And a lot of times for us, we ask so much that we don't even finish the last thing that he told us to do. So why would he continue to give us instructions and continue to tell us things to do when we ain't even done the last thing he said? So for me, before I ask God, like, what's next is, did I do the last thing he told me to do? Did I finish writing this book like he told me to do? But here I am asking for more, and I ain't done nothing with the information that he gave me already. You know what I mean? So I think that's something that a lot of people should take as well, that you have to be obedient to. It's not for you to just pray about it and write it down. You have to actually do the things that God said, even when they're difficult. There have been things that God has told me to do that are personal. And I'm like, well, what does this have to do with my business? But he was preparing my character. He needed to heal some of my broken areas in order for me to handle the level of success that he has for me. I had to go back to personal relationships and mend those things and go to counseling and things like that to be able to handle the level of success that he wants to give me. But if I would have overlooked the things he told me to do, as opposed to just doing them, then I would be foolish asking for him to give me more.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we have to realize that faith without works is truly dead, but we also need to realize that we sometimes get in our own way of the answers that God has for us. So finding something that works for you, that makes you pray and obey, like you said, finding some kind of way that reminds you consistently to do that.
Yeah.
You don't have to be perfect at it, but you do want to try to do that work, to pray and obey. So I'm with you on that 100%. I wanted to ask you, so you wrote a book, you did the prayer journal. What are some of the things that have been challenges as you've been going on this journey over the last 2 years and things have been shifting? What are some of the challenges that you have come against?
Everything. Everything is challenging, especially when you're doing or you're in alignment with what God wants you to do. So because I have this podcast platform and I have these thousands and thousands of people who listen to me all over the world, now that I'm using my voice to speak on the things God wants me to speak about and not just anything that's selfish, that's going to make me money or whatever, like the devil is going to be real mad about that. So he's going to try his hardest to shut me up because my voice means something. When I open my mouth, people listen. That's my gift. So he's going to try his hardest to shut me up. And so I think there's been a lot of attacks on me specifically to shut me up. And a lot of it has come from, like, let's go back to when I first heard from God to change the podcast name. All of my insecurities came to the surface. When I did the podcast originally, I sought out co-hosts. The reason why I sought out co-hosts, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with co-hosts, but the reason why I did it was rooted in brokenness. So I sought out co-hosts because I felt like my voice by itself, nobody would want to listen to me. You know, I don't really like to talk about surface level things too much. I'm a relatively quiet person in real life. So when I do speak about things, I want them to actually mean something as opposed to us just I'm thinking the phrase I'm thinking of has a cuss word in it, so I guess I gotta think of another one. Instead of just, talking about surface level things, I like to talk about things in depth. And I felt like nobody would want to hear that from me. Like, nobody would want to listen to me. Who am I to talk about these things or whatever? So I sought out co-hosts, and that kind of helped mask my insecurities. So then when it came to God telling me, no, you need to do the podcast by yourself, because that was the first message before understanding that I needed to talk about God in it. The first instruction was you need to do it by yourself. And God didn't even show me what to do next with the podcast until I did that thing that he told me to do. So when it came to talking to my co-host at the time about doing the show by myself, I was nervous. And I procrastinated for months. Like, I was not saying nothing. And y'all, I would be talking to you and Tiana. Y'all be like, Tatum, why don't you just, just do what God told you? Like, just take care of that. And I was like, no. And I had all the excuses in the world about why I didn't need to do it or whatever. And eventually I just put my big girl panties on and did it. And it wasn't until I followed that instruction that God began to show me what else. But the fear had came back when it came to doing that, because it was like, again, who's going to listen to me by myself? I was scared. Now, fear is powerful. Fear will do one or two things. Like, it'll either paralyze you or it'll fuel you to keep going. And for me, I don't like a lot of people deal with like what ifs. Like, they think of all the things that could go wrong if they do something, like, oh, what if this happens? What if that happens? I like to think of like, what if I don't? And I know my life means something. So for me, the thought of somebody else not getting to where they need to be because I was fearful is enough to keep me going. Not just me. Like, it don't matter to me about myself. It matters more so of that person I'm supposed to help. I couldn't live with myself if I knew that I was supposed to impact somebody in a way. Like, people email me now about getting out of domestic violence situations and all of these things by listening to my podcast. And I'd be like, yo, what if I would have never even did what God told me to do? What would that mean for their life? What would that mean for her life? Where would she be if I wasn't obedient? So yeah, that fear came up, and I was just like, all right, God, like, we've built up this trust so much thus far, so let me just do what you tell me to do. So I did that. So then God began to share with me, okay, now you need to include me in your podcast. Then here come the fear again. Like, whoa. You want me to talk about you? Like, I ain't nobody's preacher, pastor, nothing. I didn't grow up in church, nothing. What do you mean I need to talk about God? Who's going to listen to me? Like, that was always the self-doubt talk that came into my head. And I know it was the enemy trying to shut me up. And even coming into this year, so that was at the end of last year. So coming into this year is when I really started to implement a lot of the things that God shared with me. And of course, the trials still come. So coming into this year, God was like, oh, you need to rebuild a relationship. I have a strained relationship, but somebody in my family. And so God is like, you need to work on that relationship. That relationship has to be restored. And I was like, bruh, I really don't want to do that, because not only am I dealing with this unfamiliar territory of being blessed and bossed up and having God as my CEO of all of that, now you want me to dig into places that I don't even want to look back at, like all of the things that I buried deep inside of me that I really don't want to deal with. Now you want me to look at those areas and fix them. Like, this is too much. And it really is a lot. And so for me, it was overwhelming. And I know, again, this is the enemy just trying to keep me stagnant, trying to push me back into my comfort zone. But I fought through it, and I did everything that God told me to do. And another issue this year, or another thing that I've had to come up against, is just the reworking of how I naturally do things. So, I'm a outwork everybody type of person. Like, that's my mentality. I'm on the block before you get on the block, and I'm still on the block after you went to bed. That's my attitude. But I realized in growing in my relationship with God that me working that hard to where I'm overworking myself is a sign that I'm not trusting God to do what he said he was going to do. So instead of me just constantly focusing on the strategy, overanalyzing the results and all of that, now I need to learn how to be obedient and not worry about the result. And that's very difficult for me. So I had to figure out, like, where do I fit in this now? You know what I'm saying? Like, okay, God, I'm listening to you, I'm being obedient, but where does the work part fit with the faith? I know the scripture, but how, like, practically, what does that look like? And so for me, I had to figure that out and just rework my whole way of doing things, understanding that because I'm praying, that doesn't mean I'm not working. That's actually a strategy. You know what I mean? Me taking my laptop into my prayer closet and asking God to give me strategy on what I'm doing, or me taking my journal and saying, God, what am I doing this week? What do you have for me? Or something else that I did is I fasted for a year. I started on August 27th of 2017 and I finished August 27th of 2018. So on those fasting days, not feeling like you spent the whole day doing nothing. Like, no, I spent the whole day getting closer to God and getting clarity about what I'm doing. That's not laziness. That's not working just because people on Instagram is doing something different. So I really had to understand that the work that I was doing in my spiritual life was just as important as any work that I could have been doing in my business. So just changing my perspective and also not comparing myself, because it's very easy to get on social media, especially when you're doing things differently. Like, this is no longer my business. This is God's business. I'm walking on God's path for me, not what anybody else says that I should be doing. And so when you're doing something that's different from the norm, it's easy to look at everybody else that's doing one thing and feel like something's wrong with you. But when in actuality, let's say a fire broke out, everybody's running straight towards the door to get out. But because I'm listening to God and I'm doing my own thing, I done figured out the back door is open and I got out quicker than they did. So just for me, I really had to change my perspective and get comfortable and rest and trust what I was doing is the right thing.
So, for those of you who are listening and don't follow me or Tatum or know anything about us directly right now or yet, I say yet because both of us, God has already told me that both of us are about to be next level. So we're going to be a household name at some point.
Yeah.
But if you're listening to this and you don't follow either of us and you don't know, Tatum and I were in a mastermind together all last year, right? So I know all these things about Tatum. I know the journey that she's been on. But one thing that I think has been one of the most encouraging things to see is to watch her go from being a person who second guessed some of her decisions to being a person who fully trusts what God told her to do, even when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not about being comfortable. It's about having that trust and that faith in the darkness.
Yeah.
I've done a podcast episode on that before about having faith in the darkness, because when you're in the darkness, you might be bumping into stuff, you might be tripping and falling over stuff, but God is always there guiding you and pushing you through. So as you have been going through all of these things, Tatum, and just from the growth that I've seen, what do you feel like has been maybe like your top 3 biggest blessings just from being obedient and following your dream and what God has called you to do?
The top 3 blessings, I would say peace is the number one blessing is peace. Because again, when you're doing something, especially when you're in alignment with what God said, like, the enemy is going to try extra hard. Like, in church, I've been studying, about spiritual warfare. And in Deuteronomy 7, it talks about how when they entered into the promised land, it was all of these spirits who were stronger and stronger and wittier, more cunning than them. So I had to having peace while I'm getting, attacks from myself, there sometimes we form weapons on ourselves. Sometimes it's not just other people putting us down or outside situations, it's ourselves with our negative thoughts and our negative self-talk and our self-doubt and fear and all of these things. So for me, with treading on this faithful territory, walking in the dark and really just allowing God's word and what he said to be a lamp at my feet is hard. But in the midst of all of that, having peace in it is the biggest blessing. And having peace in it also just shows me I'm doing the right thing. So now you even said like how I used to always second guess my decisions. Like now somebody could say something to me and I'd be like, nah, it could make a lot of sense. It could make a lot of money. But if I know that it's not what God said to me, I'm not hearing it. I don't really care. Like, no shade to whoever it is, but that's not for me. Thanks, but no thanks. So just having peace in my relationship with God and being comfortable in what he's told me to do is the number one thing. And I did a podcast a couple weeks ago talking about just don't underestimate the enemy and how he'll really try to throw you off your game. And for me, another one of the ways the enemy has really tried me is attacking my identity. So it felt like I was running. I use the example of it was like I was running towards the things of God, but it was like something was still trying to pull me back to what I was comfortable with. It's almost like somebody had a resistant band around me and I'm running and it's trying to keep me in place. And so, and that was me really just running towards my calling, but being so scared of what that means. We all want to be called, right? We all want God to use us. We all want to be on this platform, but it's a lot that comes with that. And it's a lot that you got to do when nobody's looking to be able to prepare for that and deal with it. I think it was Susie Orman, and one of the things of hers I was watching where she talked about everybody want to be successful, or everybody wants you to be successful until you're successful. And so then everybody want to pull you down. So for me, I think it was like I knew where I was going, but I was so scared of it. But that peace, that number one blessing I'm talking about, like that peace that made me more confident to be like, you know what? Yeah, it's scary. Yeah, I feel like something is pulling me back, but forget that. That resistance band is getting cut off, and God, we going to do this. I'm not playing any games anymore. I'm not slow stepping into my purpose anymore. Like, we're going to make this happen, and the enemy is just going to be mad, period. So again, that confidence came from just that peace, and that peace let me know that I was doing the right thing. The other biggest blessing is, how these days a lot of people talk about like anxiety and depression, and that's just a really big conversation right now, which it should be. But for me, I haven't dealt with, and I guess that's still a part of peace, but I haven't dealt with any of that. I used to be super anxious and I haven't had to deal with that at all. And I guess the second blessing is just the confidence in who God has called me to be and how much I love myself offline. It's not just about posting what looks cool on social media or what's going to get me the most likes or what people want to hear. I really like myself offline. Like, you know what I mean? And that's a place that I haven't, for a while it was like, I could like myself if I get to this level of success, or I could like myself if I got this or I got that. I'm cool right now. Of course, I want the things that God has for me, but I like myself, I love myself, and I'm confident right now. So I know that, and I pray that when God does give me these things that he has for me, that it's not going to change me. And then the last thing, the biggest blessing is the relationships that I have. Like, I really don't like to talk about my personal relationship, but I do have to say, like, my fiance has been like the biggest blessing in my life because he sees me every single day. He sees me when I'm not sounding as confident as I do right now. I'm in the closet crying because I don't know why God decided to choose me. He sees like all of that, but then he also sees me wipe those tears off, recite the word over my life and get myself together and get back to work. Like I'm a cry, but then I'm going to get back to what I was doing. But he's been the biggest blessing in my life, really, to just remind me of who God says I am, keep everything in perspective for me. pray for me. Just sometimes he'd be like, come here, and just pray right then and there. So he's been like a huge, huge blessing in my life. And I know that God sent him to me when he did, because I was going to be at this point and I would have needed somebody. So having people like you, who I know I could call, like, going through things more personally, with trying to mend relationships in my life, being able to talk to somebody like you, being able to talk to other people in my life, that's been a huge blessing, just having those relationships as well, and knowing that I'm not by myself.
Listen, that just made me cry, but I'm not gonna no thug tears today.
Yes, but, no thug tears.
I just want to point out to everybody who's listening, not one time did she say anything about money or material things. Mm-hmm. She has peace and confidence and relationships. Like, those things right there are what really matter at the end of the day. And I know on a day-to-day basis, we do have our ideas about the material things that we want, or the money that we want to have. There's nothing wrong with that either. But when you think about the blessings that God gives you, when you're chasing your dreams and going after your goals, like, don't get so caught up in thinking about the money you can have or the material things you can have, when really what God has out there for you is peace and confidence and good relationships and people you can trust and people who believe in you. That is worth so much more. It's priceless, honestly. You cannot buy stuff like that. So just keeping those things in mind on those hard days, because me and Tatum were talking about this before. It's not that every single day is easy. It's not that every day you can do whatever you want to do, or it's not like that. But on those days, keeping in mind that you have peace and confidence, and you have people that believe in you and trust you, and you can trust in them. Like, that alleviates so much of that anxiety and that you have on a day-to-day basis.
And I do want to add to that too, Tish, about the material things. In the beginning of the year, I was so excited about all the things that God showed me about 2018 for me. I was so excited. I just knew this year was about to be lit. So I had wrote down like all of the things that I was believing in God for. And a lot of them was material. I wrote down, okay, God, I want my house in Potomac. I want me a nice $1 million-something house back up in this prestigious neighborhood. So when I have kids, they can grow up around wealth. Like, I had all this written down. I want my white Porsche Panamera. So I can be dry. Like, I had all of these material things written down that I wanted. And so, and that I still want. Don't get it twisted. But,
wanting those things.
Right. So, but in the beginning of the year, God was leading me to study the book of Jeremiah. And I was trying to figure out why. And so I bought this Bible study offline. And I was just going through every day, whatever the study was, and I finally realized why he wanted me to study Jeremiah. So Jeremiah was deemed to be successful in God's eyes. He was a prophet. He did whatever God told him to do. Sometimes he ain't like it. He had moments when he was second guessing. He had moments when he was like, God, they not trying to hear me. Why do you keep sending me out here with messages? And Jeremiah was poor. They tried to kill him. They did all of these things. So from our definition of success these days, we wouldn't have looked at him as being successful. But God saw him as being successful because all he wanted to do was please God. And so that's why every time God gave him a word, he went out and said it. He went out and did all these things that God told him to do, despite the fact that wasn't nobody trying to hear it. And so what God was trying to get me to understand is success is not whatever I've conjured up in my head that it is. It's not the house in Potomac. It's not the Porsche Panamera. It's not all of these material things that I want. It's not the influence and all of that. Success, first and foremost, is pleasing God. And anything that you put above God then becomes an idol, and then it becomes a problem. You know what I mean? So if you're doing what you're doing because you want these material things, if you're doing what you're doing for any other reason besides to please God, then you're out of alignment and you dead wrong. And so it was kind of a check for me. Like, God was like, you dead wrong. This is not what you're doing this for. Yeah, I made you these promises of what you're going to have this year, but please believe your success is nothing but pleasing me. So you need to change your little definition now or you're going to be in for a rude awakening. And so for me, I was like, okay, I get it now. Yes, I want these things. Yes, I will have these things, because he's not going to leave me out there like Jeremiah. He's going to still give me life and give it to me abundantly, but I need to change my perspective of success. And so once I shift gears a little bit and focused on not what can I have, not how much money I can make, but what can I do to keep God happy and proud, then I was able to really get in alignment the way I needed to be. And I wanted to tell that story for anybody who may be looking at success as all of these different things. Success is nothing but pleasing God, period. Period with a T at the end. Period.
Listen, I love doing this podcast so much because I love the takeaways that I get from it, and I hope that everybody listening is taking so as much as I am away from this. And I talk to Tatum fairly often, so just getting to have this conversation and record it and sharing it with the world. But I always learn something through these conversations and through these interviews. And one of the things I just took away was that your obedience, just from this whole conversation, is that your obedience is really the same idea of being committed to the work and not the reward.
Yes.
Right? So you have to be committed to the work and not just the reward. God is going to give you the work to do. You can't, and He's going to show you the reward. That does not mean it's going to come tomorrow, right? It's not going to mean it's going to come, wrapped in a bow. But you have to be committed to the work anyway. You got to be committed to the people that you are called to help. You have to be committed to the words you were given to share. You have to be committed to those things first. And so throughout this conversation, that's really what I'm hearing that has changed over the last 2 years. And not really changed, but evolved. That's a better word.
Yeah.
What has evolved over the last 2 years is your commitment to the work is your commitment to God, and not just your commitment to the reward at the end. And so I'm so glad that you took this time to share your gems with us. I'm not going to hold you in here forever, because I know me and you can talk for a long time.
Yeah, this went by fast.
But what'd you say?
I said this went by fast.
It did. It really did. But I just wanted to wrap up by giving you an opportunity to share with people maybe like your final thought, one last thing you want to share with folks, and then also sharing where people can follow you, get in touch with you, where they can buy your books, all that good stuff. Like, give us a final thought, and then also plug yourself. T-Money.
T-Money. That's my rap name. But I guess my final thought would really just be for anybody who's listening, anybody who's an entrepreneur, who's chasing some type of dream, is to really just take a step back to make sure that the dream is in alignment with what God wants you to do. And it's okay if you don't know that, but really take the time to explore that. Because the last thing you want to do is spend time and money and years and all of these things pursuing something that's so small compared to what God has for you. So yeah. And then also with my story, something that I had to come to grips with, and I like to tell everybody, is pivoting is not failure. I didn't fail because I chose to go from the Queen Academy to doing consulting to now talking about God being a CEO. I didn't fail. I just pivoted, and that's okay. Because all that matters is I got here. It's only been 2 years. You know what I mean? Like, it seemed like it's been a long time, but it's only been 2 years. But because I finally got it, I finally am in alignment with what God wants me to do. He's going to give me above and beyond what I could have even done in the last 2 years. And He's already even done that by the way He's expanded my territory. So those are my last thoughts. Plug myself. Listen to my podcast. It's on everywhere you can listen to podcasts at. It's called Blessed and Bossed Up. My first book is called Blessed and Bossed Up, Surrendering Your Ambition So God Can Have His Way. That's available on Amazon. My prayer journal's on Amazon. All of my social media is the same at Tatum Temia, TatumTemia. That's it.
Awesome. Well, I want to end this by telling you how proud I am of you.
Oh, thank you.
So happy to be able to see your journey continue. I'm super duper proud of you. I can't say it enough. And I want to thank you for joining us again on Views from a Dreamer. Thanks for
Yeah.
coming to do this Where Are They Now episode. And of course, I'm looking forward to watching you grow and move forward. And Dreamers, as always, thank you. I want you to like, comment, subscribe, all that good jazz. Get our engagement up because we are back. You can follow me on Instagram at Latisha.Carr, or you can head over to LatishaCarr.com. Show me some love. You can find me there. Leave reviews, all that good jazz. But we're back, and I'm super excited to continue this series, and I hope that you all were blessed by this interview. So, peace and blessings, dreamers.